What are the biggest goal-setting mistakes weightlifters make? What's the best setup position for the clean? And how should you deal with knee pain in your training? In episode 11 of the Last Set Best Set podcast, Coach Calvin and I dive deep answering these questions and more. And if you want your question answered on next week's episode, then make sure to check out the link in the description below. Welcome back to the Last Set Best Set podcast. I'm Coach Brian. I'm the owner of Big Ben Strength. I've been teaching Olympic lifting for the last 10 years now.
And I am Coach Calvin. I am current captain of Lindenwood University's weightlifting team, as well as a coach through Big Ben Strength.
And today we're going to be answering some questions that you guys submitted to us, starting with hot topic here. What are the biggest mistakes people make with goal setting? So the biggest mistakes that people make with their goal setting, I'm going to approach this a little bit more for beginners, people who are maybe starting their fitness journey, or they've been dabbling and they want to start taking it seriously a little bit more. And then Calvin's going to kind of talk about some stuff for some more advanced lifters who are a little bit further into this. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say, like with goal setting, especially for New Year's Eve goal setting or New Year's resolutions, is people usually will stop at the end result that they want. So they'll stop at the end goal, right? They're like, okay, I want to, let's take a fitness example. I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, cool. Solid goal here. What needs to happen for that goal to happen? That is the next step. And sometimes people just don't even make it any further than setting their New Year's resolution. They just stop there. I want to do this. That's it. The next step, you have to figure out what do you need to do to achieve that goal. So set a plan. Sounds super basic, sounds super obvious. A lot of people just don't do it. That's really it. A lot of people just don't do it. The next step, the big thing, is setting that plan. From there, you have to truly understand what impact this is going to have on your day-to-day life, and actually consider this and think about, okay, if I want to lose 30 pounds, I am going to need to go to the gym a few times a week. Okay, what days am I going to go? Am I going to go before work or after work? Okay, if I'm going to go before work, what time does that mean I have to go to bed? Okay, if that's the case, what time do I have to eat dinner at so that I can be ready to wind down to go to bed so that I can go to the gym before work? Or if I'm going to go after work, am I going to go home and change in between and then go to the gym? Which, honestly, terrible idea. Never do it. It's the number one way to just give yourself an out. I would say, if you are going to go to the gym after work, your best bet most of the time is to pack your stuff and go straight from work to the gym. Because the moment you get home, especially if you sit down, you're done for. You're cooked. So I would not recommend doing that. But that's a good idea of just like taking the next step of truly understanding, okay, what is my goal and what does that mean that I'm going to have to do to achieve it? And truly understanding the impact that it's going to have on your life, your day-to-day schedule, and understanding that is what it's going to take. Where people get burnt out because they don't see results a lot of the time, and then they give up. And a lot of the time they don't see the results because they didn't think a couple steps ahead to understand what they're going to have to change in their day-to-day. So that's kind of my spiel for beginners there. I think the other big mistake, and this is probably the biggest one, is doing too many new things all at once. So if, let's say, your goal is to lose 30 pounds, we'll stick with that same example, even though we don't do anything related to weight loss for weightlifting stuff really at all. I always joke when people ask me, like, hey, can you help me lose weight? I'm like, I mostly help people go the other way, honestly. Trying to get big, check out the OlyBuilding program. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the 8-week OlyBuilding program. Guys, this is the most fun I've ever had on a weightlifting program. I love weightlifting and hitting big lifts, but I also love how bodybuilding makes me feel. So I put together a program that prioritizes equally both weightlifting and bodybuilding. It's not just a couple sets of accessories at the end of a normal weightlifting program. This is a true 50-50 split between weightlifting and bodybuilding, so you can build a ton of muscle while also increasing your snatch and clean and jerk. You can find the program linked in the description below, and if you use discount code LASTSETPOD, you can save 20% on the program. All right, back to it. The biggest mistake is people trying to change too many things all at once and not being able to keep up with it. So if you're trying to make diet changes and lifestyle changes to work out a ton, and you're also trying to be really on top of your recovery, and you're also trying to cut down on screen time, and you're also trying to read a book every day or whatever it is, all of those things just become so much additional stress that it makes it impossible to achieve the one thing. Whereas if you were to do what I like to call like building momentum, can I pick
Yeah.
one thing that I think is going to at least set me up for success that I can reasonably do every single day forever? Can I make one small change that will just be easy for me to do? So an example of that is this year I started writing 1,000 words every day. I did that because writing is a big part of like creating content. Where we plan ahead for the podcast, we have all the questions prep, stuff like that. Um, at first, it was I'm going to write 2,000 words every day, and that was way too much writing to try and knock out, along with trying to train every day and also trying to coach people and also trying to stay up to date on my messages. Where instead, when I switched over to 1,000, it was just I'm going to wake up, I'm going to write, I'm going to get it out of the way, it'll be done for the day. And that was the only thing that I worked on. And because of that, I was able to actually make it a habit in my day where after about 12 weeks, it wasn't something that I had to think about. It was something that I just kind of did all the time. Every now and then I would have to like remind myself I got to get that done. But for the most part, it just became a day-to-day habit for me. And that allowed me to add on whatever the next thing is, because it's not trying to have to make a big checklist of a bunch of things I need to do. It's just make one habit change until it's actually just something that's you do naturally, and then you add on the next thing. So that's kind of my big thing. Build momentum with your habits, with your goals to set you up to hit those. Try not to make a ton of changes. Don't go 0 to 100 miles an hour. You're gonna run out of gas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I'll reference something that I think does apply to both beginner and sort of advanced lifters. And if you guys are regular listeners of the podcast, you've probably heard me talk about training with Hampton Morris a million times. So Hampton is an Olympian.
Crossing
He
that
won.
off my bingo.
Yeah, there you go. Every episode I got to mention it once. But I stayed with Hampton for about 3 weeks training while he was getting ready for the Olympics that he would eventually win bronze medal at. And I learned a lot about actually building habits and specifically building systems of accountability for those habits. So it's like, if you make it through kind of what Brian outlined as like a checklist, so you have your goal, you want to squat this weight, you want to get stronger, right? And then you make it past that step and you're like, okay, well, to meet that goal, I have to eat 200 grams of protein a day or whatever it is, right? Like I have to eat my body weight in protein. That's my body weight. So, um, that's a good thing to have. Then like you said, you got to do that third step of really deciding how you're going to do that. How you're going to do that thing you need to do the thing you want to do, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So, for instance, for me, like I just have to build a system in my life that I always do. It's a routine. When I wake up in the morning, I have a protein shake or a significant source of protein with my breakfast.
Yeah.
Before I go to bed at night, I always have another protein shake.
Mm-hmm.
And that pretty much has me covered. As long as I eat a normal lunch, I eat a normal dinner, I know I'm hitting my protein goal without even having to track it, without having to do it like anything else. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just know I'm hitting it. It's a routine. Like I don't even have to
Yeah.
think about eating my protein anymore. It's like so easy.
Yes, that is basically like the way that that works is you have to make it easy for you to do the things that you want to do. Right? Like
Exactly.
that is the hack. It's not trying to brute force David Goggins your way through your goals. It's make it easy for you to achieve them. Right?
Where
Set the
yeah, like
protein shake up by your bed.
the other side of it is like, oh, somebody decides they want to hit 200 grams of protein a day, so they track everything they eat, which is a huge time consumer
Yeah.
and just generally just isn't sustainable for most people. Like it's not for
Mm-hmm.
me. Like I
Right.
I have tracked for maybe as long as like 6 weeks in a row, just about
Mm-hmm.
everything I ate.
Mm-hmm.
But what that was establishing those baselines, establishing those routines. So when I did that for that period of time, for instance, you could just track like 2 or 3 days
Yeah.
and do the same thing that I do, have a protein shake in the morning, protein shake before bed. And if you hit your protein on all those days, just eating normally through that, like you don't have to track anymore then because you know you're hitting your protein.
Right.
Um, so that's the things I noticed him doing. Hampton, the Olympian guy, uh, the big part that I wanted to bring up about him was how he had sort of a list of priorities when it comes to what he was doing. He had a million things that he knew he sort of should be doing, but when it comes down to it, sleeping a full, very good night's rest was a very high priority for him. Getting in his training, obviously, to what he needed to be training at was sort of in line with that. Um, and then things fall off if he can't do it. So that you want the
Hmm.
things to fall off to be those less priority items.
Yeah.
Like for instance, maybe he just doesn't have time to do his accessory work because he has to eat his meals. He has to eat all his meals because that's actually more important than doing accessory work is eating all your
Right.
meals.
Right.
Um, so you make that list of priorities. Like know, like hey, like instead of just skipping the gym to go do XYZ or whatever that you think you should be doing, like foam rolling, recovering, stretching, or whatever, like have that list of priorities and know that those 1% things kind of fall off
Yeah.
before
A
the
hundred
bigger
percent.
picture. Anyways, I'll be real brief though about with advanced lifters. What I think that matters, a lot of advanced lifters feel a lot of pressure, I think, once you're in this weightlifting community, to compete and to be hitting PRs and setting these big goals because that's what social media is showing you. You're seeing these big PRs, you're seeing these huge lifts, these world records, there's everything. You don't need to do that to enjoy the sport. You don't have to be making this crazy level of progress numbers wise, or hitting like I said, hitting these giant PRs to be happy. You can just enjoy your training and get that out of it. You don't have to compete to enjoy training either. So I think a
Yeah.
lot of people get sucked in, especially I actually see it in powerlifting. I feel like more than I do in Olympic lifting a little bit.
Mm.
I feel like when you're a power lifter, like you get kind of sucked into doing this meet, and then you're maybe being really strict about everything. And the same thing happens in weightlifting. It can be the same.
For sure. For sure.
Where maybe you don't actually want to compete. Maybe you don't actually want to go to the American Open Series 1 this year. Like you're just going because your coach kind of thinks you should, and um, some other people going. Like, but if you don't want to go,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have to go.
Yeah.
Basically, what you want to do is get to the highest quality of training you can have and recovery, diet, everything around training, without also burning out. So if pushing
Yeah.
for four national meets a year is too much on you and it's going to burn you out and you're going to hate weightlifting in a year, like don't do that. Like
Hmm.
take a meet off, maybe your training isn't 6 times a week with 19 sessions or whatever, like something crazy, right? Like so you're not doing like double days like most of us. It's very
Yeah.
consistent and maintainable to do 5 day a week training or even 4 day a week if you work a full-time job or something, but you
Yeah.
can do that all year long, and so you'll make more progress that way than going 6 times a week and burning yourself out in 2 months and then taking time off or something. Yeah.
Dude, I mean, that's 100% it. It's like two really valuable questions you can ask yourself if you're an experienced lifter, especially, is what makes me enjoy training the most, and how do I keep doing more of that? Sounds super simple and super maybe oversimplified, but it's honestly something that people just don't even really think about all that much. How can I how can I make sure that I keep enjoying my training? Because if you keep enjoying your training, you're going to keep training. Generally, that's how that works. Do that. That's a great question to ask yourself. The other one is, you said it. What's the highest quality of training and recovery that I can do while also not burning out? If you can start to get good at recognizing what your burnout signs are and then what the things are that are leading to that, then you can start to spot it earlier and you can start to realize when you need to cut back on something, right? Or return back to focusing on what you enjoy about training. So those are kind of all the things that I want to talk about here for the New Year's resolution stuff. Question number 2 comes from Leak Cloud, who asks, "What's a good setup position for the snatch and clean?" So really good question, especially because the start position really is the foundation of your Olympic lifts, right? Like if your start position is off, it's going to affect everything else later in the lift. So people, I think one of the most frustrating things that people will do in weightlifting is try and focus on their different techniques, like their second pull and their catch position and everything, and their start position is just different every single time. It's like what are we even talking about? We can't do anything else. We can't work on anything else unless this is the same every rep. Because otherwise, it's just not going to make a difference, honestly. Um, generally, a good setup position for the snatch and clean are going to be pretty similar. The basic level that we're looking at here is that for most people, we're looking for hips level or slightly higher than the knees when we're viewed from the side, back arched and chest up like a proud chest, mid-foot pressure, and the shoulders in front of the bar with the back of the armpit directly in line with the bar. Okay. That's generally good setup position. Stance is going to be highly individual from person to person. I would recommend for the most part, start with hip width or slightly narrower than your squat stance if you know where that is, so that when you leave the ground and you land wider in your squat stance, you're in the right spot, right? And then the final thing there is that toes out more in the snatch and more forward in the clean. Especially, it's just a little bit easier to set up in that position because of the wider grip. You're able to point your knees out a little bit more. Might feel a little bit better for more people. So that's something I found. And then finally, like just this super basic one is keep your knees out in line with the toes. The thing that I really hate seeing, especially in the clean, is people with a narrow grip that's so narrow it's pushing their knees in and like caving their knees in. No one is strong with the knees caved in right from the get-go. So those are kind of my main things here on the setup position. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think when it comes to working on your start, a lot of people are doing clean pulls, doing clean deadlifts in their training. A big thing I see is people just turn their brain off during those. They think, oh, it's not a
Yeah.
main movement. Like I just can not think about the technique on those. When those are
Right.
actually even better to focus on your technique, for instance, in the clean pull, because you only have to worry about that first really portion of the lift. Like you only have to worry
Yeah.
about extending with it in your start position. Like
Right.
whatever cues you're working on in the pull, so you can get even more mental brain power towards whatever it is you're trying to fix that you've identified needs to change a little bit in that start position. So really just emphasizing being intentional in your accessory movements like the clean pull and clean deadlift.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Just be just as intentional in your snatch and clean as you are in your snatch pulls and clean pulls, and you'll tend to get a lot more benefit from both. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by my brand new training program, the Welcome to Hell program. The Welcome to Hell program is 12 weeks long with your choice of 3 or 5 days a week and is designed to help you set PRs in the snatch and clean and jerk. This is the most successful program I've ever written. It's what helped Carmen add 10 pounds to her clean and jerk and finally hit 200 pounds. It's what helped Will add 25 pounds to his snatch and finally hit 225. You guys can grab the program at the link in the description below. And as a special thank you to our podcast listeners, you can save 10% by using the code LASTSET10 at checkout. All right, back to the episode. All right, question number 3 comes from Fit Eric Yan, 73 kg. Have you dealt with knee pain before? What do you have on this? Have you dealt with knee pain before?
Not really, not like anything chronic or super long. I mean, we've
Yeah.
all had the kind of thing where you get done training and you go to dinner. Maybe you've been sitting at dinner for an hour, hour and a half, and man, your knees are like aching. Man, they are like, excuse me, the you can hear that the instant pot, the dinner is going off. But yeah, man, like I've definitely dealt with like some achy knees, or you're in class and like you're just stretching them, kind of like massaging them
Yeah.
a bunch, sort of like a tendonitis kind of thing. But other than that, I really haven't had any bad level knee pain. Um,
Hmm.
although I do know kind of like a lot of people in weightlifting deal with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I will say I'm a very strong in the squat kind of lifter. I have a huge strength reserve when it comes to doing like Olympic lifts. So
Hmm.
typically like my jerks and cleans aren't extremely heavy enough to really fatigue my knees just because of my heavy squatting. Whereas a lot of like more weak lifters that are more efficient are dealing with maybe a little more knee pain because they're more maximally using their quads more
Yeah.
often.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you're that I do think it's a benefit to have a big strength reserve for that main reason that like, you're if you're clean and your front squat are super close together or something like that, then every heavy clean that you do is also a max effort front squat. It kind of makes things hurt a little bit more. But yeah, so I think I would say like it's kind of normal to have things like this pop up and flare up every now and then. I would say like people tend to maybe get a little too worried about pain in particular, I think. And sometimes you just taking the stress off of it and be like, this is okay. It's not that big of a deal. More than likely, the main thing that you have to do, and I've dealt with knee pain and stuff like this in the past. I've had two flare ups in the last like 2 years or so that were pretty bad. And most of the time, almost every single time, it's overdoing it in your training in some way. So generally, like most pain tends to come from load management. If you're an experienced lifter, that just means that you're either doing too much volume or too much weight or too much frequency. For what you're prepared for, right? Or maybe it's just that your body doesn't like squatting 3 times a week and it responds better to two. Things like that. It's just stuff that you figure out as you get a little bit more experience as a weightlifter, and as you get a deeper, as you and your coach get a deeper understanding of like how you respond to your training. You'll be able to make changes to that over time, right? So that's one big thing. I would say another thing to keep in mind is if you are dealing with some pain, a lot of weightlifters tend to neglect training the hamstrings. We do a lot of quad work. Every Olympic lift generally is pretty involving the quads. Every squat that we do generally involving the quads. We don't tend to bias and directly train the hamstrings very often. I think we should keep that in there a little bit more, and have a little bit more of a well-rounded program. So I would recommend keeping in things like RDLs, keeping in even more traditional bodybuilding style exercises like hamstring curls are a great way to get training to the hamstrings that aren't very fatiguing, especially if you're using like banded hamstring curls. It's probably one of my favorite hamstring exercises for weightlifters because they don't really make you all that sore, but you get a good benefit of them. So I would keep that in your training there. One big thing that honestly really helped me, and I wish it didn't help as much as it did because then I wouldn't have to recommend it, but doing the couch stretch for 5 minutes per leg each day. Dude, do that for 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row. You will be surprised how much of your knee pain goes away. So I would recommend that. But also, if it's a consistent issue, if it's a chronic problem, and kind of no matter what you do in your training, you're having issues with it, you definitely go get it checked out. Sports PT, somebody like that. Get some expert eyes on it because we are not doctors. Okay. So that's that. And if you are dealing with knee pain, the big thing to remember is that you just generally have to learn how to train around it. So that means pushing the exercises that don't hurt and pulling back on the exercises or avoiding the ones that do, and figuring out how to be clever in your training so that you can still get the maximum benefit without any of the downsides.
With any pain, let's think about any pain, load management, what's going on, how much stress are you putting into your system that is your body, and how can you help out that stress, sleeping more, eating more, and then, kind of reducing the training load are just the biggest factors when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's not the flashy stuff. It's not the fancy exercises where it fixes your pain in one. It's the simple basic stuff, really.
Yeah, and more than likely for the weightlifters out there, like knees over toes guy got really popular, and a lot of those protocols got really popular. For the most part, if you're an Olympic weightlifter, a lot of it, like especially the really aggressive, like knee forward split squats, it's great exercise. Doesn't really apply to you. We do tons of deep squatting already. That's not really that big of a weak point for you. So just be careful with stuff like that. Focus more on the training program, making sure that the training volume and intensity is appropriate for you, and maybe train your hamstrings a little bit more. That will probably cover a lot of bases here for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. All right, question number 4 comes from B Centeno. We're going into rapid fire questions here. Who asks very simply, jerk pointers. The jerk is probably the most complex of the Olympic lifts. So just being able to briefly go over this is a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try. I made a video on this a couple weeks back. It might be a couple months back now, actually, called the split jerk checklist. So I'm going to link that up here. I would recommend just go check that out. It's probably one of the best videos that I've made about specifically the jerk, and we're going to run through it real quick. So, to fix your jerk, we want to start from front to back. Okay, so that means that the first thing that could possibly go wrong, we want to fix that, and then we move on to the next thing. So the first thing that you want to assess is your rack position on the shoulders. Okay, so what we're looking for there is shoulders push forward to create a shelf for the bar and slightly up so that the bar can actually rest there rather than having it supported by your arms. Then it's much harder. You're not going to get any leg drive out of it. So fix the rack position first. Make sure that you're tall. Make sure you're getting a big deep breath in and bracing. Then we want to take a look at our dip position. So the bottom of the dip, we want to make sure that we have our knees pointed out in line with our toes, right? Maybe we need to have our toes turned out a little bit to a certain degree so that we don't run out of room and end up leaning forward at the bottom of our dip. And we want to make sure that our torso is completely straight up and down and that our weight is perfectly in the midfoot. That's pretty much all we're looking for in that bottom of the dip. What you'll see people do sometimes, it's kind of funky, is they'll collapse at the core, they'll slouch, right? They'll drop their elbows when they get to the bottom of the dip. They'll lean forward. They'll lean back too much sometimes. All kinds of little funky things. Their knees will cave in when they hit the bottom of the dip. Things like that we just generally want to try and avoid. Okay, so fix that dip position after you assess the rack position. Is there anything on the dip position I missed there?
No, you covered it pretty well. I think like a lot of the times we think about maybe like the balance that you have in that dip as well. Um,
Yeah.
so not just looking at like, okay, your knees are tracking good and like um, your the bar's in the right spot in your rack and okay, yeah, it looks good from a textbook like stance, but where is that balance, especially is huge. A lot of people
Yeah.
try to start the jerk on their heels, and when they get to the bottom of the dip, their whole weight shifts forward into their toes.
Yeah.
Because where does that bar want to be when you're doing anything front rack? It wants to be forward. It wants to be pulled forward and down. So yeah, just doing as much as you can to hold those good positions. Like weightlifting is just about holding positions. Like
Yeah.
that's the biggest part. Um, and then you can be athletic and explosive outside of that. But yeah, that you covered it real well. What's next?
So the next thing is the split position. So we're going to go ahead and take a look. I know there's things that happen between the dip and the split. We're going to take a look at the split position next. Okay. In that split position, we want to have a vertical front shin, a bent back knee, and the back heel off the ground relatively, but it doesn't need to be super high off the ground. Okay. We also want to have our hips stacked under our shoulders. So we shouldn't have this big old C in our lower back here in the split position. We want to generally be pretty stacked so we can keep our core braced and we can support the majority of our weight with joint stackage rather than relying on overextending. Okay. Now, split position also means that overhead, we should have elbows locked out. We should have the bar over our spine, right? So it shouldn't be just head through, it should be back. So I like to think bar behind the head or behind the ears is a great cue for that. And we should generally be able to stop when we get in that split position. One of my favorite cues to fix the split jerk, if you have no idea what's going on, is to pause in your split and hold it. And generally, if you can pause in your split and hold it, you're probably in the right spot most of the time. You may need to adjust your balance if you're in an incorrect spot, but most of the time you can generally assume that if you're able to pause in your split pretty well, especially with a heavy weight, you're probably in the right spot. You're good. Okay. So those are the big things on the split position. The last thing that we're going to talk about here is timing. Okay, so timing is two things. Timing is timing the transition of leg effort to arm effort, and then timing is also understanding how to accelerate the barbell. Okay, so in most of the Olympic lifts, To keep it simple, I like to think legs move the bar up, arms move the body down, right? It's maybe a little too simple of a way to think about it, but for a lot of people, if you're not super familiar with this concept, it's a great way to think about it. Legs drive the bar up, then arms move the body down. You have to have enough of a connection to the bar to move your body down. So you still have to stay connected to the bar. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is the speed of the lift. So in all of the Olympic lifts, they should start slow and get faster. Realistically, they should be fast and get faster from there. But it's helpful for a lot of people to think about starting with control and then building speed as you go. So making sure that we're not rushing the dip or unlocking our knees super quickly, where we're actually dipping faster than the bar is moving down. Right? Because then we run into this issue of the bar landing down on us at the bottom. So that's a big mistake that I see a lot of people do, generally just rushing that. So that's your checklist, right? We've got rack position, dip position, split position, then timing. Okay. And if you address all of these, generally, you're going to have a pretty great jerk. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I don't know if you've seen. I just saw this meme go around Instagram, but it was with like the little light switches. Like you turn, there's three of them, and now the one I saw had like Snatch.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I saw that.
And
Yeah, it
so
was
like when you turn
from
one,
Evidence Strong.
when you turn one on, the other, oh, well then you fix this one, and the but you can't have all of them at once. You might feel that way with your jerk technique too. Like maybe you really get a good rack and dip, um,
Hmm.
but then while you're working on your split or your timing, suddenly something falls apart in your dip that you
Yeah.
because you didn't have time to focus on it. So you gotta like work back and then keep going from there. Make that a habit again. Then you can work on your timing again. Like so,
Uh,
it might.
yeah.
It sounds
I mean,
simple.
it's so spot on. It really does feel like that. I think the meme was like, you can only have two lifts that feel good at any given time, like snatch, clean, or jerk. So it's so spot on. It's pretty true.
Yeah.
Every now and then you'll get into a magical window of time where everything is just moving, and it's so nice. But it's a little bit more rare than you think.
Oh yeah, and it comes even with the individual movements. Like, say like your three light switches on and off, where like in the clean, for instance, like start position, um, position at extension, and then like your timing or something, right? Like maybe that's your
Hmm.
three things that you need to work on. And once you say you normally do your start position really well, so you're just working on the timing and your extension. You get those pretty well, then suddenly something in your start position falls apart or something,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
just kind of the story of weightlifting. That's how it goes.
Or you do it all well, and then you get really good at it, and then you
Yeah,
PR, and then now your percentages are heavier, and you got to redo the whole thing over again. You know?
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Don't expect it just to all be perfect because you worked on every little part. So don't be upset if
Right.
it's not perfect after going through the checklist or going through whatever. It's all part of the game.
Exactly. This is the part of weightlifting that we like. You know, we just have to remind ourselves that sometimes. All right, let's go ahead and move into question number 5 here. Um, how's your cardio training?
This is like a
Listen, not
laughable.
good. Yeah, not good. I'll say I go on lots of walks. I go on at least 2 walks a day, if not more. I was on the phone with a friend for like an hour and a half today, so I was just walking that whole time. It was wonderful. That's the extent of my cardio training. What about for you?
Yeah, I did some snatch doubles today, so
There you go.
that's a lot of cardio. No, I'm kidding, but yeah, honestly though, like it does come through weightlifting training. Like in the end of the day, I'm in a very competitive phase of my weightlifting right now. I'm competing 3, 4, 5 times a year, going to some bigger level meets, and so I kind of got to keep things a little more specific when it comes to cardio. Now I can't wait till March this year, this next year when we go into definitely more of an off season phase. But when it comes to lately in my weightlifting training, I will manipulate the rest periods, especially for accessory work, making those lower to get a little more metabolic demand from that, as well as
Hmm.
using EMOMs in the Olympic lifts,
Yeah.
which are going to challenge your cardiovascular system just slightly more. So those are some ways that you can do it, but still stay specific to weightlifting.
Yeah, 100%. Like at the end of the day, we're training for the sport of weightlifting. We're not training to also be able to run a marathon or, do a competitive 5K. And I think some of that is just that CrossFit has so much bleed over into weightlifting, especially because a lot of weightlifters tend to be or used to be former CrossFitters. They think that they have to have a certain level. You do generally want to have a decent base of conditioning, and we can build that, periodically through GPP phases of training, right? But you only need to have enough conditioning to be able to survive your hardest possible training session in weightlifting. That's about it. Beyond that, like much more isn't really going to be all that helpful for you, and so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But maybe a couple periods a year, maybe you know, 2 4 week blocks a year, you dedicate a little bit more time to try and improve your cardio in some way. But beyond that, focus on the lifts. That's the cool thing, right? Anything else you want to add to this?
Well, one thing I do a lot actually is going to the sauna. And
Yeah.
there have been shown some cardiovascular benefits in the research of that. Um, Now that's more on the health side of things than it is on like a performance side. Like I'm not saying going to the sauna is going to make you, be able to run longer necessarily, but
Right.
um, there's probably some pretty good benefits there with regards to your long-term health, which is usually what we think of maybe when we're thinking of cardio anyway.
Yeah.
Just keeping healthy and not having like crazy high blood pressure and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, more of a from a health perspective, and so that's something I use just because I like it. If you hate the sauna, if you hate being hot, I think you said you're kind of that way, Brian. Like you don't really like the heat that much, right?
Can't stand it. I also live in Florida, so I'm just like vaguely in a state of sauna all the time.
Yeah, like if you don't like it, like it's probably not a good idea for you. But if you do like it, like I do, then it can be good.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Question number 6: have you tried other lifting shoes? So we're both on the Romalio 2 gang. I think it's the best weightlifting shoe out there. I love it. I have had a little bit of experience with other weightlifting shoes. The only other one that I've tried um, was, oh god, this was my first weightlifting shoe. It was the worst shoe ever. But Reebok, I think it was like 2008, 2010 at some time. They were trying to like make CrossFit style weightlifting shoes, like ones that you could wear for a workout and also lift in. And they had this like shoe insert that I guess you had to like step in and then put the insert in the oven and like bake it, and then it would be like designed for your foot. I got that secondhand, so I got the oven baked weightlifting shoe from another person. So it didn't even make sense for me anyway. Um, Not a great weightlifting shoe. Don't recommend it. I don't even think you can get them anymore. After that, I got the ROM 2. Fantastic weightlifting shoe. Super solid, super high heel height, really heavy, and I kind of like that about them. What about you? What about you?
Yeah, for about my first year and a half lifting, I used the ROM 4. That was mostly when I was not following any program and had like no coach. Like I used it in high school. It was kind of just the
Yeah.
first option that popped up when I searched weightlifting shoe. Um, and I used those for a while. I ended up like trying on maybe one of my teammates' ROM 2s, and I kind of liked the feel better. So I decided to buy it. I also just thought it looked a lot better.
Yeah.
I wanted something that like kind of looked pretty good in comp. Uh, and so I got that ROM 2 probably after my first national meet. Was when I bought those, and I've just used them ever since. I'm gonna use them until they fall apart, most likely.
Yeah, and then get another pair because ROM 2s are the best weightlifting shoe. I love them. So yeah, so that's kind of our experience with weightlifting shoes. But let us know in the comments what your favorite weightlifting shoe is if you made it all the way into the deep end of the podcast here. So yeah, I think do we have anything else that we need to cover on this?
No, that's all I got.
Cool. All right, guys. Where can people find you, Calvin?
At Calvin Lackey, 81 kg.
Good. Yeah, we can. You guys can find me at Big Ben Strength on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and check out our programs and articles linked in the description below. We'll catch you guys on next week's episode. Bye.